Hello, welcome to Framlingham College. I'm Ben and I'm here with Graeme McLoughlin from BBC Radio Suffolk. Welcome Graeme, thank you for being with us. We're going to talk about his career in radio and journalism. First of all, how did you get into this career, this industry?
I guess this all started with me probably making radio programmes in my bedroom when I was younger, and then getting to the age of 17 or 18 and thinking, what am I going to do? I quite like doing radio. How do I get into that? I ended up going to the University of Leeds to study broadcast journalism. At the time, I didn't want to be a journalist per se, but I knew I wanted to be on the radio in some shape or form. A few years later, I got my first radio job, which was at a station in Lincolnshire called Links FM. Yeah. I worked there for about 2 years as a news journalist, and then moved to Suffolk in 2005, and I've been at BBC Suffolk ever since. For the first few years, it was mainly working towards news programmes. From about 2007 onwards, I started presenting, and then in 2010, I became sports editor, which is where I still am now.
So what's been the biggest change you've experienced in that time working in BBC Radio Suffolk?
Technology's changed a lot. So when I first started recording interviews, we did it on, I'm not sure whether you'll even remember these, Ben, mini disc players. So it was, we had the Sony Walkman back in the late 80s, early 90s. Then we had the Discman, then we had mini disc players, and this was meant to be the future. We'd record all our interviews on those. I guess one of the problems with that was that when we would then upload an interview, you'd have to play it in real time. So if you'd gone out to record a breaking story and you got a 10-minute interview, you had to wait 10 minutes when you got back for it to, find its way into your computer. Over time, that has changed. We now record everything on our iPhones, and if I was speaking to you now and recording an interview, I can, as soon as we're done, press a couple of buttons and it's sent back to the office and someone can edit it and it can be on the radio within the next 10, 15 minutes. So yeah, technology's changed a lot. In Suffolk as well, there's so many more sports stories, I would say, of value than there were when I started in 2010. We used to mainly cover Ipswich Town and Ipswich Speedway as the county's two main professional clubs. But since 2010, we've had the rise of Ipswich Basketball, the rise of Bury Rugby Club, and we've also had some great individual sports stories as well. Familiar names, I guess, to Framlingham College would be a couple of the hockey players, the likes of Hannah Martin, who's done some coaching sessions here, and her brother Harry. So yeah, we're following more and more sports stories with each year that passes, I would say.
Right. So what changes do you expect to happen in the future of the industry, would you say?
Well, the BBC is currently going through a huge change whereby a lot of our radio programmes in the coming weeks and months will, at BBC Suffolk, will cease to be just for BBC Suffolk. They'll be for other stations as well. There'll be a lot more shared programmes as the corporation moves to a more online way of thinking. Already in recent weeks, a lot of the programmes I do, bits and pieces from those have been chopped up and put online, so people don't have to wait until 6 p.m. when I start broadcasting on a Thursday or 2 p.m. on a Saturday. They can go online and find our audio instantly.
Right. What do you most enjoy about your job, would you say?
I think I was just speaking to Mel at Framlingham College ahead of this. One of the great things I enjoy is watching the journey that some of our athletes and our sports teams go on. I've had a really good relationship in recent years, and well, actually since I started in 2010 with Nick Drain at Ipswich Basketball Club. At the time, the club was kind of just breaking into the National League. They've since gone on and won multiple championships across all age groups. Harry and Hannah Martin, who I've mentioned, I remember them both coming into the studio at BBC Suffolk when they were teenagers who didn't have much experience of international hockey or being interviewed by people like me. Fast forward 10, 13 years later, they've, between them, got multiple Commonwealth and Olympic Games behind them, and are just great people to talk to. So yeah, I love that side of it. I love the journey that our individual athletes and sports teams go on, really.
Who's the most impressive person you say you've interviewed or spoke to?
That's a great question. The most impressive person that's a real tough one, because I've met so many great people, great role models. I'll flip the question and say, who's the most famous person you've interviewed? And that might not surprise you to hear is a Framlingham boy, now a man by the name of Ed Sheeran. But at the time, he wasn't famous. I was presenting a program called BBC Introducing at the time, and we actually hosted a live gig. We needed 2 acts. We found 2 acts. This was good. This was at the Anchor pub in Woodbridge. We were going to do a live program there and have two bands playing. This was going to be on a Friday night. On the Wednesday, one of our acts pulled out. We needed a last minute replacement. And at the time, who'd you call when you need someone to fill that spot? It was Ed Sheeran, who snapped at the chance, played, was quite good. I wouldn't have said at the time I expected him to go on and dominate the charts globally. But that was back in 2010. And then as each year progressed, I watched him go, the occasions just got bigger. Jules Holland, Olympics, and global megastar.
Was that the last time you interviewed him?
No, the last time I interviewed him was in, I think it was 2015, when he received his honorary degree at Suffolk New College. Not Suffolk New College, University Campus Suffolk. That was the last time. And he was still, although he'd just been on stage with Beyonce and Stevie Wonder a few days earlier, he was still exactly the same Ed Sheeran that I had first met in 2009.
How hard is this industry to get into, would you say, for like a young person like me
I think to get on university courses, it's very, very competitive because lots of people want to do it. And there's only so many places on a particular course that they're really popular courses. So I guess what I would say to anybody trying to get into the industry, don't feel that you have to apply for a media-related course. There's other ways in. You could study pretty much anything you want, but just express an interest in one of your local radio stations. Get in touch with that station. Hospital radio is a great route to go down as well. Just get experience of presenting, of reporting, radio stations being what they are, being how much content they want to provide and how few people they've got working there, are always on the lookout for people who will do stuff for them. This sounds bad, but for free initially. And then if you're that person that says yes to things, it can open up other doors. It can lead to other things. And I've known, example I'd give there is Alex Jakes, the Channel 4 Formula 1 commentator. He used to do things for me for free and built up his portfolio and look where he is now. It really can happen.
It can pay off then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very interesting. And how about your future? Would you say you're going to stick in the same career path, or what would you say?
I'm very settled in Suffolk. Ever since I've moved here, I've loved it, and I've found myself in 2010 when I became sports editor, just landing on my dream job very early, really. And it's one of those jobs where you can't really get bored because sport is always happening. It's always live. Seasons change. There's, the minute one athlete retires or one player leaves a club, the next one comes along. It's constantly progressing. And I mentioned earlier the BBC's move towards a more online way of thinking. I still absolutely love doing what I do on the radio, but that's potentially open up other avenues as well. So, touch wood, I'd like to be at BBC Suffolk for a long while yet.
Nice. And how would you say your job's changed though? So you talked about the future and how it's technology, but how about in terms of interviews, podcasts, has that been an increase in podcasts or?
Yeah, we've the podcast market is absolutely huge now, really. And I guess our programs are changing all the time. I initially started, I've always presented a match day program of a weekend with Ipswich Town being the main focus of that. We did a 1 hour sports preview program during the week when I first started. Now it's 4 hours on a Thursday, so there's a lot more content to fill, really. So I guess it's changed in that, the workload's gone up. We're always on the lookout for more athletes, for more content, to cover as many new sports as possible and sports that haven't perhaps been covered on the radio before. That growth towards an online way of thinking, like I've mentioned, we're taking, kind of a lot more photos now. We're doing a lot more on camera bits and pieces. So there's a gradual shift from radio to other mediums.
That's interesting. And also, you were talking about sport in general and like smaller sport teams like Bury Rugby, and how has that changed, like as in terms of not just going for Ipswich and the basketball, but also rugby and lower teams? How is that? How's your job affected by that? Like, would you say?
I guess we're led by seasons, so we'll obviously cover Ipswich Town, we'll cover basketball, we'll cover rugby when the seasons start. We have our way of working throughout a year is kind of split into two, really. We have 9 months where it's pure football and Saturday sports like your rugby, like your basketball. Then we have this period when those seasons end, where we're telling a lot more individual stories. So in building contacts over the year, once it gets to May, you're thinking, right, I've got a 4-hour programme now, but that Ipswich Town hour, that non-league football hour, that Bury Rugby, that Ipswich basketball content is completely gone. But we've still got to come up with a 4-hour programme. I guess that's where your contacts over the years come in. You'll kind of lean on certain people and individuals to fill programmes that way.
So what was it about radio that you loved that made you want to have a career in that field, would you say?
I think I like the live elements, really. Yeah. But then when I started in radio, live reporting was the thing that actually most terrified me. So all of a sudden I'd gone from really enjoying that to, right, you're on in 10 seconds, speak to this guest about this, and you've got 10 minutes to fill. And that was actually quite daunting. I remember my earliest memories of local radio were, I grew up in Liverpool, so my dad was a huge local radio fan. We listened to BBC Radio Merseyside a lot, and there was a quiz show on Sunday afternoons or Sunday mornings actually, hosted by two DJs called Billy Butler and Wally Scott. And it was absolutely hilarious. It was centered around a fruit machine. It was called Hold Your Plums, funnily enough, interesting name. And we just used to be in hysterics listening to that on a Sunday morning. Not long after that, when I was a little bit older, I started. I did a little bit of a work placement at BBC Radio Merseyside and got to experience that, and it just grew from there. Really, I started, like mentioned, going back to the top of the podcast. I started recording programs and bits and pieces in my bedroom, just playing around with it, and it evolved to where it is now.
So do you think podcasts is going to be the biggest like growth in the market of like radio in general and live kind of?
I'm not sure. I think that there's already, the podcast market is so huge. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts available now across all the various streaming platforms. Sometimes I think, do we need another one? But then I don't know, another original idea will come out there and it'll be popular. I'm not sure. I think lives, more and more live sports coverage will be certainly the way my job, I would imagine, would go in the coming months and years. But that's, I mean, like I said, when I started out in radio in 2005, I never would have imagined at the time that I'd be recording interviews and just pressing a couple of buttons on an iPhone and sending it back. The advances in technology are incredible, really. I don't know where it may lead.
So about skills-wise, what do you think are the most essential skills you would need to go into broadcasting radio?
I think you've got to be able to talk. But no, I think that few people ask me this, really. In a newsroom, I think you have to be calm, and you have to enjoy it as well, really. And also, you can never be too prepared. I think one of the reasons I'd like to think our matchday programme and our sports social programmes over the years have worked is because we put a lot into it. You get out, that enjoyment that you get out of it often comes with the amount of preparation that you do ahead of programmes. So if you're off to interview somebody, don't just, unless there's nothing you can do about it, don't just rock up and hope that interview goes for the best. Do your research on a particular subject. I'd like to say you can never get too much content as well. Why record 5 minutes of an interview when you've potentially got 10, 15 minutes with that person? And also another thing, when you're interviewing people, actually, listen to what they say. When I first started, my habit was to write all my questions down, almost word for word, going into an interview with a piece of paper in my hand, and I would read those questions and occasionally not listen to what was coming out of the interviewer's mouth. I've found over the years it works so much better if you can do bullet points and just keep an eye contact with the person who's chatting to you and listen to what they say. It's often the best content comes from an interviewee might say something, you'll react to that. It won't be the question that you've written down beforehand.
What's your most popular show, would you say?
Oh, it's the matchday programme by far. Yeah, especially this season. Yeah, loads of people have been listening to it this season, but by far and away you don't realise, I think, how big a club Ipswich Town is and how popular a club is. Going back to the promotion party in the park event at the beginning of May, we were debating at the time, because of staffing levels, whether to actually do a programme from backstage. It was really busy at the time. We'd just come off the back of a really busy season. It was a bank holiday Monday. Trying to get people to work on a bank holiday Monday when they made other plans is quite hard. But we did the programme, and I remember getting numerous emails and tweets afterwards. Some people in Wales, some people overseas, saying thank you so much for doing that, because it felt like we were a part of the event.
Do you think how the club are doing has a big effect on your show? So a few seasons ago when they were relegated, do you think less hits, or is it still kind of the same?
I think if they're at the top of the table or at the bottom of the table, people are listening. It's when they have those mediocre seasons, and you'll know this as a football fan, Ben, when you get to November, December time, and you're not going to be promoted, but you also know you're not going to be relegated. You're just kind of in that lull in mid-table. I guess that's when our number of listeners will go down. But certainly this season, and going back to the season when they were relegated in 2018-19, our listener figures were as high as they've ever been during those two campaigns.
Have you ever experienced any bloopers or had to pull it out of a bag, when they've made a mistake, or you've experienced a mistake live?
Yeah, there's probably some I can't mention, but there's been a few. We've had a couple of match day and match night phone calls, shall we say, that went off down an avenue that we perhaps didn't want to continue with. So you have to be kind of trigger happy on your fader, really ready to fade people down if they're getting a little bit too animated and loose with their language. You just get. I've presented a number of programmes at football grounds or on location somewhere, and signals aren't always 100% reliable. How do you react in those moments? I guess there was I remember being at Portman Road once actually and getting a message in my ear saying, from the person driving the desk, saying, right, our systems have gone down, so that audio that you want us to play that's 5 minutes long, we can't play, so you're going to have to talk for 5 minutes until we can load up the computer again. And again, going back to what I said earlier, that's where your preparation during the week before or the night before in particular comes into play, really. You have to think on your feet. But yeah, there've been a few of those over the years. I think if it wasn't for the workload, I would still be presenting music programs as well. I absolutely love doing that. I think presenting live music shows, going back to the Ed Sheeran story, I remember during that period we hosted, it was about six programs that year from live music events around the county. And in terms of I learned so much broadcasting live at the time, reacting to bands being on stage, speaking to punters in the crowd, and just getting it boosted my own confidence of dealing with events like that. So then when I would go to a sporting event, women's tour, for example, at Aldborough and Thorpe Nest, I remember covering that stage. You just had more confidence of being around people and broadcasting live. Sport and music have always been the passions. I think one of the, I wouldn't say issues I have with news journalism, but there was obviously I remember covering, it's a really sad story, but when I was at the first radio station that I was at in Lincolnshire, there had been a hit and run accident, and the brother of the victim was put up for a press conference to find the person that had done this. I remember going to interview him, and I'm feeling really nervous about this. I'm now going to talk to a man who's lost his sister in a hit and run accident, and he doesn't really want to speak to me, but at the same time he has to speak to me because he wants to find out the people who've done this. I remember the interview was, you can imagine, he was very emotional. He broke down a lot, and I got back in the car at the end of the interview, spoke to the news editor at the time, and they were like, "Oh, how did it go?" I said, "It was absolutely awful. The guy was in pieces. He broke down." I remember the reaction from the editor, who to be honest was a very nice person and became a friend not long afterwards, really. But their reaction at the time was, "Oh, great, that'll sound brilliant on the radio." And I thought, how insensitive is that? I was very tempted at the time to just delete what I'd recorded, because I thought that's no way to react. I think often I find that in news. I mean, sport, the drama is there. A live sported event where there's a terrific finale, you don't need to sensationalise. It tells itself. I think often in news, the temptation is to try and make more of a story than it is, and sensationalise a bit too much. And that's a side of the industry that I don't particularly warm to.
Has that been the most difficult thing you've experienced?
That was hugely difficult, yeah. I also remember interviewing after the tsunami in Sri Lanka, having to, a couple of months later, go out and speak to a mother who'd lost her daughter in the tsunami. Never found the body. Obviously, so many bodies weren't found. It was a very tragic event, but she'd come to accept that she was never going to see her daughter again. I remember going into a house at the time and shaking, but then telling myself, well, if you're shaking, how do you think she feels? She's the one who's gone through this. It was she spoke ever so well, but that's a really difficult side to the job. You get those stories in sport as well. Don't get me wrong. I've speaking to members of families who've lost people, sports stars who've passed on. I find in news there's a lot more doorstepping and a tendency for editors to want you to push the microphone into the face of somebody that really doesn't want to be spoken to, and that's a difficult side of the job, that is.
With your job, do you go to other countries and abroad a lot, or is it mainly based kind of Suffolk? Really, or?
It's mainly BBC Suffolk. It's mainly serving the county, really. Yeah. There have been times when we've gone outside. One of my favourite programmes I've ever done was 2012 at the Olympics. So just outside the main stadium, we were there for the first Saturday of the games and the final Saturday as well. On the first Saturday, we had 6 athletes from the county all competing at the Olympics on that day. That was a great programme. Obviously, Ipswich Town away days have taken me to various stadiums all over the country, including, although I'm not a Manchester United fan by any stretch, presenting a programme from Old Trafford when Town were there in the League Cup was a brilliant experience.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Graeme. It's been really good.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Ben.